G'day folks, let's talk about Australia, a land of sunshine, shrimp on the barbie, and apparently some serious political shake-ups. On May 3rd, 2025, Anthony Albanese, leader of the Labour Party, pulled off a blinder, winning re-election with a margin not seen since World War II. It's a bloody big deal, mate. This wasn't just any victory, it was a historic landslide, the kind that makes political analysts spit out their Fosters in disbelief. This wasn't just a win, it was a thumping endorsement of Albanese and a resounding rejection of the opposition. Think of it like this, Vegemite, you either love it or hate it. Well, it seems Australia really loves Albanese right now. This was the first time in over 2 decades that an Aussie Prime Minister managed to hold on to power for a second term. The last bloke to do that was John Howard. And let's just say, times have changed a bit since then. Albanese's win wasn't just about his charm or his ability to rock a pair of budgie smugglers. It was about something much bigger, something that stretched far beyond the shores of Australia. This was about Donald Trump, the ghost of American politics past and the long shadow he continues to cast on the world stage. Now, you might be thinking, hold your horses, John, what's Trump got to do with Aussie politics? Well, strap yourselves in, because this is where things get interesting. Trump's impact on global politics has been like that one mate who gets a little too enthusiastic at a barbie, messy, unpredictable and impossible to ignore. From Brexit to the rise of right-wing populism in Europe, Trump's influence has been felt far and wide, and Australia is no exception. Remember that whole Make America Great Again thing? Yeah, that struck a nerve, but not always in a good way. It tapped into a vein of anxiety and resentment that exists in many countries, including Australia. Suddenly, people were looking for someone to blame for their problems, whether it was immigrants, minorities, or the elites. The thing about Trump is he was a master of exploiting division. He knew how to push buttons and stir up controversy, and he did it with the subtlety of a kangaroo on a trampoline. And while some people loved him for it, others were horrified. They saw him as a threat to democracy, a bully, and a danger to the very fabric of society. Now Australia's no stranger to a bit of political rough and tumble. But even by Aussie standards, things were getting a bit much. The opposition, sensing an opportunity, started echoing Trump's tactics. They played up fears about immigration, attacked the media, and generally tried to create a climate of fear and uncertainty. It was like watching a bad cover band try to play AC/DC, all the right notes, but none of the soul. And it wasn't just Australia. This Trumpian style of politics started popping up everywhere like a bad rash. It was like the world had come down with the case of the political flu, and there was no vaccine in sight. Suddenly politicians everywhere were trying to out-Trump each other, which, let's be honest, is a terrifying thought. The problem is, this kind of divisive rhetoric can have real-world consequences. It can lead to increased polarization, erode trust in institutions, and even incite violence. And that's not something to be taken lightly, mate. But here's the thing about Australians. They don't like bullies. They don't like it when someone tries to tell them what to think or how to vote. And they definitely don't like it when someone tries to import American-style political dysfunction into their backyard. So what did they do? They did what Aussies do best. They told them to rack off. Albanese, sensing the shift in the political winds, decided to tack in the opposite direction. He campaigned on a message of unity, of hope, of a fairer and more just Australia. He spoke out against Trump's policies and rhetoric, and he promised to stand up for Australian values on the world stage. It was a risky strategy. After all, Trump was still wildly popular with a certain segment of the Australian population. But Albanese was betting that most Australians were sick and tired of the drama, the division and the constant chaos. He was betting that they were ready for a leader who would bring people together, not tear them apart. Section 5. The Power of Comparison, a Tale of Two Leaders. Now, let's be clear, Albanese and Trump are about as similar as a koala and a crocodile. One's cuddly and the other's, well, a bit bitey. But by presenting himself as the anti-Trump, Albanese was able to capitalize on the growing sense of unease that many Australians felt about the direction of their country. He became the voice of reason, the steady hand on the tiller in a world that seemed to be spinning out of control. He was that bloke you'd want to have a beer with after a hard day's work, not the bloke who'd try to sell you a timeshare in a swamp, and it worked. Australians, exhausted by the Trumpian circus, flocked to Albanese's banner. They were tired of the lies, the hypocrisy, and the constant barrage of outrage. They were ready for a leader who would tell it like it is, even if it wasn't always what they wanted to hear. Section 6. Riding the wave of discontent. Albanese's strategic campaign. Albanese's campaign was a masterclass in how to exploit a global political trend for local gain. He didn't just sit back and wait for the Trump backlash to come to him. He actively courted it. He knew that many Australians were looking at what was happening in America with a mixture of horror and disbelief, and he gave them a way to channel those feelings into something positive. He didn't shy away from talking about Trump, but he also didn't make him the central focus of his campaign. He knew that Australians cared about Australian issues like jobs, healthcare and education, but he also knew that those issues were interconnected with what was happening on the world stage. He campaigned on a platform of competence, of experience, and of a return to normalcy. He promised to restore Australia's standing in the world, to repair the damage that had been done to its international reputation, and to be a force for good on the global stage. Section 7. A mandate for change interpreting the election results. The election results were nothing short of a repudiation of the Trumpian style of politics that had taken root in Australia. They showed that Australians were not immune to the global wave of populism, but they were also not willing to let it define them. They wanted a leader who would stand up for their values, who would represent them with dignity and respect on the world stage, and who would bring people together, not drive them apart. The message was clear. Australians had had enough of the bullshit. They were done with the lies, the division and the constant drama. They wanted a leader who would tell it like it is, who would fight for their interests and who would put the needs of the many ahead of the greed of the few. Albanese's victory was a victory for hope over fear, for unity over division, and for a more inclusive and compassionate Australia. It was a sign that even in a world that often seems to be teetering on the brink of chaos, there is still room for decency, for integrity, and for leadership that inspires rather than divides. Section 8. The Global Village: International Politics and Domestic Impact. The Australian election was a powerful reminder that we live in a global village where events in one corner of the world can have a ripple effect far beyond their borders. Trump's presidency may be over, but his legacy continues to shape the political landscape both in America and around the world. His brand of divisive rhetoric, his disdain for facts and expertise, and his willingness to exploit people's fears and prejudices have all left an indelible mark on the global political discourse. And as we've seen in Australia, his influence can be felt even in countries with vastly different political systems and cultures. The Australian election was a stark reminder that what happens in America doesn't stay in America. It was a wake-up call to the rest of the world that the forces of populism, nationalism and xenophobia are still very much alive and well, and that they pose a serious threat to the values of democracy, tolerance and the rule of law. Section 9. The future of Australian politics: navigating a new era. Albanese's re-election marked a turning point in Australian politics. It showed that the country was ready for a new kind of leadership, one that was more in tune with the values of its people, more responsive to their needs, and more engaged with the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century. But his victory was just the beginning. The challenges facing Australia, from climate change to economic inequality to the rise of China, are complex and multifaceted. There are no easy answers, and no one leader, no matter how popular or well-intentioned, can solve them alone. The real work of governing, of building a more just and prosperous society for all Australians, is only just beginning. And it will require the collective effort of all Australians, regardless of their political persuasion, to create a future worthy of the sacrifices of those who came before them. Right, that's enough from me. I'm off to crack open a cold one and watch the sun set over the outback. Cheers, mates!